The North American box office, Universal Studios and Amblin Entertainment's Jurassic World Dominion stayed at number one its second week, bringing in about $58.6 million. Over the past 10 days, the film has grossed about $247 million. Globally, it has grossed about $622 million, becoming only the seventh Hollywood title to cross $600 million in the pandemic era. Second place was Disney Studios and Pixar's Lightyear with $51 million from 4,255 theaters. Lightyear was projected to debut at number one with a range of about 70 to 85 million. Joining us from Nashville, Tennessee to discuss further is Shawn Robbins, is the chief analyst at Box Office Pro. Good morning, Shawn. Thank you so much for joining us. So some have seen the debut of Lightyear as a bit of a disappointment. Would you agree?
I would. This is a film. Disney very rarely over projects their releases, and independent forecasters like ourselves really be the big return to summer animated movie going. It's Pixar's first theatrical release in 3 years since before the pandemic, at least in North America. So this is certainly a number that was very unexpected in an unfortunate way.
All right, now there is, sorry I have to bring this up, but there is an LGBT scene in the animated film. Do you think that in any way has impacted its box office from North America to globally?
It's difficult to say, and obviously it's a very tricky subject to discuss. I think, a lot of people kind of go into this film. Typically, that's a subject that's really come up in industry trades. I don't really think that the casual moviegoer pays as much attention to it, or even knew that was going to be the case. But it's certainly something that's kind of revolved around this film and several recent Disney films.
Hey, well, yeah, thanks for mentioning that, because I guess. Let's go. I think Eternals, if we're looking at the trend now in recent Disney films, Eternals, so Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and now Lightyear, with these references to LGBT. Is it, I guess, a deliberate inclusion drive from Disney?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's about equality. It's about representing everybody in their movies. And that's something that it gets conflated with, what are the business motives versus what are the ethical motives. And ultimately, it's something that should be happening. But it's become kind of a political debate around Disney that has proven a little bit tricky for them to navigate recently. But overall, I think looking at this from the positive standpoint is it provides that inclusion. It provides representation for everybody in their movies.
Gotcha. All right, so let's move to Jurassic World. Still number one, but it did suffer, I think, a 59% to about 60% drop in the second week. What do you make of the performance so far?
You know what? So far, I would say, passable. It's not quite on the level of its predecessor, Fallen Kingdom, in 2018. The 60% drop is a little sharp, but it also had a little bit of a boost from Father's Day, as we've kind of talked about. Next weekend will be a test. It will lose some of those premium screens like IMAX. We'll really get a feel, I think, of how its overall run will start to really stabilize after this. But, I think for all things considered, it was not expected to return to first place. Granted, that happened more by way of what Lightyear didn't do than what Jurassic did do.
Gotcha. So the movie looks like it will be a box office success for Universal Studios. Are we sure we've seen the last of the Jurassic World franchise?
I think overall it will be considered a success with the global take in mind. And I think Universal, while they may not revisit these specific characters again, they'll most likely revisit the brand itself at some point in the future.
All right, to Top Gun Maverick, want to get your thoughts on what this has to be an overwhelming success. Crossed $400 million domestic, $800 million worldwide. I think it probably got a Father's Day boost. Is $1 billion globally a reality for Tom Cruise?
I think it is. This is just an absolutely phenomenal run. It's done incredibly well, obviously, in North America, but it's also had a great run overseas. Tom Cruise has historically been a strong draw internationally. I think we'll probably see another boost, at least domestically, come 4th of July weekend here in a few weeks in the United States. That will give the film a boost. It will probably return to IMAX theaters at some point for a brief run. I think 1 billion is definitely in its crosshairs at this point.
All right, so same question for Jurassic World. Do you see another Top Gun film based on how well this has done?
You know what? Personally, I think it could happen, but Tom Cruise and producer Jerry Bruckheimer, who is really kind of the captain of the ship behind the scenes in that franchise, they've been very much they've said, we'll see. It depends on the story. This was a sequel that had been building for over 30 years. It's going to be hard to capture that kind of magic again, but you never say never in Hollywood.
Very true, especially if the money keeps rolling in. Next week, we've had another Universal Studios release, The Black Phone, and then Warner Brothers biopic on Elvis. How do you see these films performing respectively?
Yeah, these are a couple of movies that we've talked about a lot over the past year. So mid-range movies, like we've seen blockbusters do well in the superheroes. These adult-driven movies like Elvis, and then horror films. They don't need to make $200 million to be successful, but they bring in an important part of that audience to pad out the market and really provide more content. I think Elvis could appeal strongly to adults, particularly women. But it's also still going up against Top Gun, which nobody really expected to still be going so strong in its fourth or fifth weekend. I think Elvis is in a pretty solid position to have a long summer run, though. It won't be as much about the opening weekend as it will about the chase weekends. The Black Phone will skew younger. Horror films have typically done pretty well during the pandemic recovery because they drive that youth audience, and this film has had really good reviews as well. So that's another one that I'm kind of looking out for to be a strong counter programmer.
Okay, great. You talked about you. Just on Elvis, as far as older viewers, I think Top Gun brought them out. Are you confident that we're going to see a steady stream of older viewers for movies like Elvis, I guess, as the year moves on at the box office?
I think we need more of a sample size. Top Gun is certainly a major progression for that. The Lost City during the spring was kind of another example. It brought out women over the age of 35, which was the toughest demographic to bring back up until that point. So the more consistency we see of those films, and I think the more people return to their pre-pandemic lives, as we've seen is the case this year in the summer especially, those kinds of movies will start doing well again. We just really need to kind of get a better feel for what a movie like Elvis is going to do before we can look too far down the road. But I think it's certainly in a better position than it was even 6 months ago.
Great stuff. Shawn Robbins, Chief Analyst at Box Office Pro. Thank you so much for joining us live from Nashville, Tennessee. And we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.